The shuttle's stabilizers whined against the desert wind as it descended, sending up whirlwinds of sand that battered the hull. Inside, Evan Grant braced himself against the overhead rail, squinting through the scratched viewport at the jagged red horizon. The pale dune expanse stretched in all directions, flat, blistering, and utterly empty, except for the scattered outposts where alien students conducted their fieldwork. Atmosphere stable, the shuttle's autopilot announced. Surface temperature, 42 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels, tolerable. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. Tolerable, my ass. The shuttle hissed open, and heat slapped him like a wall. He stepped out in full gear cooling vest, reinforced boots, and polarized goggles, then adjusted his pack and started toward Base Point 6, half a kilometer away. The desert gave no relief. Each step crunched over brittle, sun-bleached gravel, and his water ration sloshed against his hip like a ticking clock. By the time he reached the outpost's main door, he was soaked in sweat. He slapped the access panel. Nothing. He hit it again, harder. Come on, come on. The panel blinked green. The door split open sideways, and cool air rushed out. Evan stumbled in, letting the door seal behind him. The interior lights flickered to life, revealing a modest research station, 6 pods, 2 labs, and a communal space. It smelled faintly of ozone and sterilized plastic. A tall, slender alien wearing a loose tunic and a translator collar emerged from the corridor. Its skin was a mottled gray-green, and 2 long fingers clutched a data slab. You were human specialist Evan Grant? Yeah, Evan said, pulling off his goggles. And you are? Fressel. Lead academic for Xenobiology Cohort 5. Right. I'm here to supervise your field excursion. You submitted a wildlife study proposal for Zone 4. Fressel nodded with a jerky twitch. Correct. We are preparing to depart within the hour. Evan dropped his pack onto a bench and sat heavily. You're not going anywhere until I check your field kits. Last group got themselves stung by a sandspine wasp. Took us 2 days to stabilize one of them. Fressel blinked both sets of eyes. We have prepared adequately. Our environmental data confirms no lethal fauna within a 5-kilometer radius. Evan raised a brow. Desert creatures don't follow maps. Fressel hesitated, then handed over the data slab. Evan skimmed it, checked the listed equipment, then glanced at the student roster. 6 alien names, none he recognized. You've got a full group. Any of them actually been outside? Fressel hesitated again. 2 have engaged in limited excursions. Figures. Evan stood, stretched his back until it popped, then slung the pack over his shoulder again. All right. I'll give them the safety rundown, then we head out. And no wandering. The briefing took 20 minutes. The students, tall, angular beings with various skin tones and blinking ocular ridges, listened quietly, though some twitched impatiently. Evan showed them how to anchor their boots in loose gravel, how to recognize heat mirages, and most importantly, how to stay in line. They marched out just past mid-morning, heading northeast toward a stretch of cracked earth known for its unique lichen colonies. Evan kept to the rear, scanning the horizon. The wind had eased, but the heat hung thick and heavy. By noon, the students were fanned out in a rough arc, scraping samples and recording notes. Evan crouched under a rock outcrop, sipping from his water tube when he heard a sharp, panicked chirp. He was on his feet instantly. Fressel came sprinting toward him, limbs flailing. It's attacking. It's attacking. What is? Fressel pointed behind him. The predator. It leaped from the rocks. Its jaw opened unnaturally wide. Evan jogged past him and saw 3 students huddled together, pointing wildly at a ridge. Something large and scaled moved there quick, low to the ground, tail swishing through the dust. A student fired a flare beacon into the air. Get back, one shouted. It's hunting us. Evan squinted, then broke into a run. Don't shoot it, he yelled. The creature rolled down the slope and stopped in front of Evan, blinking up at him with flat, amber eyes. Its body was long and muscular, covered in tan and black scales, with spines running down its back. Its head tilted, tongue flicking once. Easy, buddy, Evan said, crouching. Did you get bored again? The lizard let out a low trill and leaned into Evan's chest, pressing its weight against him. Evan laughed. Yeah, I missed you too. The students stared, frozen. Fressel approached cautiously. You are not being devoured. Nope, Evan said, stroking the creature's head. This is Gilly. She's mine. You own it. She's my pet. Desert monitor. about 5 years old. Raised her from a hatchling. Silence. One student dropped his sampling tool. You brought a lethal apex predator to a research site? Fressel asked, voice rising. She's not lethal unless you're a rat. Or stupid. She's trained. Mostly. Mostly. Evan stood, letting Gilly coil loosely around his legs. She's smart, but she gets excited. She probably smelled your lunches. A student backed away. It climbed a rock and hissed. She does that when she's happy. Another student hissed back. Gilly hissed louder. Okay, let's not start a hiss-off. Evan said, lightly nudging Gilly's flank. Gilly down. Stay. The lizard settled, blinking slowly. Fressel stepped closer, peering at her. Its musculature is formidable. You named it Gilly, short for Gilgamesh. Thought it was a male at first. You named it after a planetary warlord? Didn't know that at the time. A student approached and extended a hand. Gilly sniffed it, then flicked her tongue and turned away. She likes you, Evan said. The student looked faint. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, though the students kept casting wary glances at Gilly, who trailed behind Evan like a scaly shadow. That night, back at the outpost, Fressel approached Evan while he adjusted Gilly's heat lamp. She does not appear to be dangerous, but her presence unsettles the group. She's part of my team, Evan said, tightening a bolt. She's also good at spotting burrowed predators before they get too close. You'd rather get bitten by a sand spine? No. Then let her do her job. Fressel hesitated. You trust her that much? She saved my life twice. That enough. The alien pondered this, then nodded and left. Later that week, while the cohort was collecting nocturnal samples near a dry riverbed, Gilly suddenly stopped and froze. Evan followed her gaze, then signaled the group to halt. A shape moved in the shadows, low, sleek, and silent. Not Gilly, a rock stalker, nearly invisible against the terrain. Everyone back, Evan whispered. The students obeyed, silently retreating. Gilly hissed low and began circling the predator. The rock stalker tensed, then lunged only to meet Gilly's jaws midair. The two rolled, snapping and thrashing. Evan grabbed a flare and fired it inches from the fight. The burst of light and heat startled both creatures long enough for him to intervene. Back. Gilly. Off. Gilly disengaged, panting. The rock stalker vanished into the shadows. Evan dropped to one knee, checking Gilly's side. She bled from a shallow gash near her haunch. Damn it. He wrapped the wound with gauze, then looked up at the stunned students. That's why she's here. Fressel stepped forward. We understand now. Evan nodded, breathing hard. That night, as he cleaned Gilly's wound and applied antiseptic, he murmured, You've got to stop scaring the interns. She gave a soft trill. Evan chuckled, then winced as he touched a bruise on his arm. All right, maybe I'm not one to talk. The alien students grew more comfortable around Gilly after that. Some even offered her bits of dried fruit, which she accepted with regal disinterest. Fressel observed her closely, occasionally taking notes. By the end of the field cycle, the students had completed their assignments without casualties. Evan submitted his report, including Gilly's role in neutralizing the rock stalker. The administration flagged it for follow-up, but made no objections. As the shuttle lifted off, Fressel turned to Evan. You humans. You are difficult to categorize. Evan shrugged, one hand resting on Gilly's back. Yeah. We get that a lot. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the horizon glowed a dull orange when Evan stepped into the outpost's medbay, cradling Gilly in his arms. Her side was warm against his chest, but her breathing had slowed since the night before. The wound along her haunch had darkened, nothing alarming, but enough to keep him from sleeping. He laid her gently on the exam table and pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves. The station's medkit was stocked for humanoids, mostly antiseptics, clotting foam, and splints way too long for her frame. He rummaged through drawers until he found a manual injector and one of the few things he'd brought from Earth, a vial of broad-spectrum antibiotic he'd traded for a month's supply of coffee powder. All right, sweetheart, this is going to sting. No biting, he whispered, tapping the air from the syringe. Gilly made a low, rattling sound, not hostile, just tired. Evan eased the needle into the muscle near the cut, pressing the plunger slowly. She twitched once, then settled again. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. You are treating her without a field vet present? Asked a voice, more curious than accusatory. Evan didn't look up. She's not standard issue. Vet wouldn't know where her liver is. I do not know where her liver is, Fressel admitted, stepping inside. But I am surprised by your knowledge. I had to learn. She nearly died from a heat stroke 2 years ago. No one else was going to figure out reptile electrolytes on this side of the system. Fressel peered closer, tilting his head at an angle Evan suspected was equivalent to squinting. The wound appears less inflamed than last night. She'll be all right if she keeps still, which is unlikely. Fressel didn't reply immediately. After a moment, he asked, "Why did you bring her here? To this assignment?" Evan rinsed the syringe and dropped it into the sterilizer. Didn't have a choice. She follows me. If I leave her behind, she claws through walls until someone lets her out. This implies a level of attachment uncommon in interspecies bonds. Evan leaned on the counter, arms crossed. You've never had a dog, have you? I have never had a dog. Well, she's like a dog. If the dog could dismember a wild boar and sunbathe on lava rock. Fressel tapped his data slab a few times. Then it is fortunate that she prefers your company. Evan chuckled dryly. Yeah, lucky me. The next morning, the cohort was scheduled to hike to a salt basin 2 clicks east to study mineral blooms. Evan kept Gilly back in the outpost, secured in the shade with a frozen gel pack under her belly and a pile of dried meat she would only half eat out of spite. The students were already gathered outside, adjusting their filtration masks while the sun filled the sky with a harsh glare. Fressel stood near the front, checking each student's harness. Evan approached with an armful of spare visors and a hydration gauge. You're all going to hate me by the end of this, he said, handing out equipment. Salt dust gets everywhere. Between your toes. Inside your teeth. You'll be coughing flakes for a week. One of the students, a pale-skinned one with a voice like a kettle, asked, Why do we not simply wear full suits? Because you'll cook inside them, Evan replied. The suits trap too much heat. Not enough airflow. You'll pass out before lunch. But the salt may irritate our dermal membranes. Then keep your gloves on and don't lick anything. Fressel raised a hand. We have reviewed the terrain. Are there additional threats? Yeah. Salt spiders. They burrow under the crust and jump when they feel vibration. Not dangerous unless you're stupid, allergic, or bite one back. The group grew still. One student adjusted their collar with a slow, deliberate motion. That was a joke, Evan added. Mostly, they set out just after first light, the sun already throwing long shadows across the cracked plain. The salt basin shimmered in the distance, a broad stretch of silver white that looked almost like ice. Evan led from the front this time, keeping a close eye on the terrain. The salt crust was fragile in places, and stepping wrong could land someone knee-deep in brine. Halfway there, a student stumbled and caught themselves on all fours. Careful, Evan said, offering a hand. This stuff doesn't forgive. The student looked up, their translator collar blinking rapidly. I did not anticipate the surface tension to fracture under my weight. That's because you don't weigh anything back home. Gravity here's heavier. You've got to readjust how you move. Fressel stepped beside them, offering a stabilizing arm. We should rest briefly. Hydration levels are dipping. Evan scanned the area. We'll stop at that outcrop. Shade's better there. They reached the edge of the basin 20 minutes later. The salt stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional rise of jagged mineral formations like frozen waves. Evan crouched and scraped a sample into a vial, then held it up to the light. See the blue shimmer? That's lithium. This place sees seasonal flooding, then evaporates so fast it leaves behind concentrated deposits. One of the students asked, Is this resource valuable? Extremely, but it's a pain to extract. You'd have to desalinate half a mountain. Another asked, Have humans attempted it? We've tried worse ideas. They continued deeper into the basin, the crust beneath their boots crackling with each step. Evan kept a close eye on the ground, watching for the telltale signs of subsurface movement, rippled patches, small sinkholes, or anything that looked too uniform. He didn't spot the collapse until the student behind him vanished mid-step. A sharp yelp, a splash, then silence. Evan turned and ran back, skidding to a halt at the edge of a shallow pit. The student was submerged chest-deep in brine, flailing, their limbs too long and thin to generate real lift. Don't move, Evan called, already unhooking the tether from his belt. You'll stir up the sediment and sink faster. The student's eyes were wide and frantic. Their collar sputtered. Evan tossed the line, anchored it to his harness, and stepped onto the edge of the pit. The crust groaned under his weight, but held. He lowered himself slowly, bracing with one leg against a jut of salt. Grab the line. Wrap it around your middle, not your arms. The student obeyed, shivering. Evan pulled, using the crust as leverage. The student emerged with a slurp, brine clinging to their robes and thick, greenish globs. Fressel and another student helped drag them back from the edge. Don't touch your face, Evan warned, cutting away a soaked strap. That stuff will burn like hell if it gets in your eyes. The student's voice came back weakly through the collar. It is in my mouth. Evan groaned. Spit. Don't swallow. You'll puke for hours. He rinsed the student's face with a portable wash bottle, then checked for skin damage. Fressel handed him a neutralizing wipe from the med pack. The student coughed and retched onto the salt. I do not wish to continue today. Welcome to fieldwork, Evan muttered, wrapping the wipe around the student's hands. They cut the expedition short. The sun was nearing its peak, and the basin's surface had begun to soften as sign moisture was rising from below. Evan kept the pace slow on the way back, watching the student for signs of heat stress or disorientation. Back at the outpost, he helped the student out of their stained gear and ran a saline flush through their mouth and nose before administering a mild antiemetic. The student's color returned slowly, though they refused to speak for the next hour. Fressel lingered nearby, silent. When Evan finally peeled off his own boots and collapsed into the mess hall chair, he found Fressel already seated across from him, data slab between them. None of the cohort anticipated that level of terrain instability, Fressel said. They never do, Evan replied, pouring a cup of lukewarm tea. That's why I'm here. Your interventions have been effective. But I detect signs of fatigue. I'm sleeping 4 hours a night and spending the rest patching up lizards and aliens in a glorified oven. Of course I'm fatigued. Fressel hesitated. Would you accept assistance? Evan raised an eyebrow. From you. I have studied basic triage protocols, and I do not sleep often. Evan considered. Fine, but no touching Gilly unless she lets you. That is acceptable. Evan sipped his tea and leaned back, eyes closed. You know, she's going to be furious I left her behind today. Fressel tilted his head. She comprehends exclusion? She comprehends everything. She just pretends not to. From the hallway came a low, impatient trill. Evan didn't open his eyes. And speak of the devil. By the third cycle of fieldwork, the students had stopped flinching every time Gilly passed by them. She'd taken to lounging in the middle of the outpost's common area, tail lazily sweeping across the floor tiles, ignoring the aliens unless one of them dropped something that smelled remotely edible. The cohort had adapted mostly. One still wore salt-proof gaiters indoors, and another had begun muttering observational notes aloud whenever Gilly shifted position. Evan let it slide. They were learning, even if it was through a combination of trial, error, and mild terror. Late afternoon, the air inside the lab shimmered faintly from the heat. Cooling units sputtered, overworked, and underpowered. Evan stood at the counter, examining a sample tray of crystalline spores collected from the basin. Gilly was sprawled across a pile of discarded field mats, her head resting on a shipping crate labeled non-pressurized. Handle without guilt. Fressel entered, carrying a narrow container filled with translucent gel. His gait was steadier now, less of the awkward stutter Evan had first noticed. He placed the container gently beside the spores. These samples emerged from the lower sediment layer, Fressel said, adjusting the lighting. Unusual pigmentation, possibly due to prolonged exposure to lithium-rich deposits. Or a microbial bloom, Evan replied. Could be seasonal. You need a full cycle to confirm. We will not be here that long, which is why you're lucky I'm here. I've got a backlog of basin samples going back 3 years. You'll get your trend lines. Fressel's gaze lingered briefly on Evan's left hand, wrapped in a fresh bandage. You have sustained another injury. Gilly tried to eat a toolkit. I tried to stop her. She didn't bite, just flailed. Wrench slipped. Your species appears to suffer frequent minor trauma. Part of our charm. Fressel looked unconvinced, but said nothing more. He bent over the spores, adjusting the magnification lens until the crystalline edges came into sharp focus. You have not yet explained your choice to remain on low-tier assignments, Fressel said after a pause. Your qualifications exceed this posting. They keep asking me to take a lab job on one of the orbiting stations, Evans said, picking up a pair of forceps. Air-conditioned, full amenities, even a cot that doesn't fold into a wall. That seems beneficial. Yeah, but it doesn't come with her. Evan nodded toward Gilly, who snored softly. Fressel straightened. You would decline superior living conditions for the sake of a companion animal? She's not an animal. She's Gilly. That didn't seem to satisfy Fressel, but he didn't press further. When the sun dipped below the ridge, Evan stepped outside to check the environmental sensors. The wind had picked up, not a storm, but enough to scatter grit like shrapnel. He tightened the shield over the solar array and cleared a collection of dead insects from the intake vent. The desert was quiet, but not silent. Distant clicking echoed from somewhere near the ridge, probably a colony of burrowers relocating after the last heat surge. By the time he returned inside, the lights had dimmed for evening cycle. Gilly stirred and padded into the hall, claws tapping rhythmically on the floor. She paused beside the mess unit, sniffed, and then made a dissatisfied sound deep in her chest. "We're out of dried mice," Evan said. "You'll live." She flicked her tail against his shin and wandered off in search of something less disappointing. As Evan sat at the comms console to log the day's observations, a student, Nick, the youngest of the cohort, entered carrying a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "I have a question," Nick said, placing the bundle on the table. Evan glanced up. "All right. I collected this earlier." Nick unfolded the cloth to reveal a pale, leathery egg about the size of a small melon. It was half buried beneath a mineral slab. Evan leaned in. "You moved it." "Yes." "Was that incorrect?" "It's not great," Evan said, carefully examining the egg. "If it's viable, the embryo might have been mid-development. Moving it could have disturbed the orientation. I did not detect any vibration or warmth. That doesn't mean it's empty." He pulled a portable scanner from the drawer and held it over the egg. A faint pulse registered, slow, irregular. "Still alive," Evan said. "Barely." Rennick's eyes widened. "Then I have endangered it. Only if we don't do something now." He stood and took the egg into the med bay, setting it in a shallow tray lined with thermogel. Gilly followed, sniffing the air with interest but keeping her distance. "What is it?" Rennick asked from the doorway. "No idea," Evan said. "Could be a sand glider. Could be a ground burrow. Either way, it needs stable warmth and humidity." He adjusted the tray's settings. The console buzzed faintly, and the gel began to glow with a soft, even heat. "This won't guarantee survival," Evan said, "but it's better than leaving it to dry out." Rennick stepped closer. "May I observe its development? If you're willing to take responsibility for it." "I will." "There's a chance it imprints," Evan added. "Some of the local species bond with the first thing they see after hatching." Rennick hesitated. "What would that entail?" "Hope you like being followed." The student stood quietly for a while, then nodded. "I accept." The egg stayed in the med bay overnight. Evan checked it twice, adjusting the gel and monitoring the pulse. He kept notes, not because he had to. This wasn't an assigned task, but because he wanted to see what came of it. The next morning, just as first light crept across the floor, a faint tremor passed through the tray. He watched as the shell cracked, slowly, a fine line appearing near the top. A sliver of something pale and wet pushed upward, then paused. "You're early," Evan muttered. "Figures." Rennick entered moments later, eyes wide. "It is hatching?" "Looks that way." The hatchling emerged over the course of 20 minutes, a stubby-limbed, translucent creature with oversized eyes and a tail that twitched erratically. It looked around, unsteady, then locked its gaze on Rennick. "It sees me," Rennick said. "Yeah, and it's filing that away forever." The hatchling crawled toward the edge of the tray and chirped once. Fressel entered quietly behind them. "You have acquired a dependent." "Technically, he did," Evan said, nodding to Rennick. "I'm just the babysitter." Fressel studied the hatchling. "Its biology is unfamiliar. I'll run a DNA sweep later. For now, it needs rehydration and protein. I will retrieve hydration gel and nutrient paste." Fressel left without waiting for agreement. Rennick stared at the hatchling. "What shall I call it?" "Don't name it yet," Evan said. "Wait until it survives a week. You'll thank me." The hatchling sneezed. "Unless it insists," Evan added. That evening, the cohort gathered in the common room. The hatchling, now dubbed Meep, due to its persistent vocalizations, sat curled on Rennick's lap, drowsy but alert. Gilly lay across from them, watching with one eye open. She hadn't tried to eat it, which Evan took as a promising sign. Fressel stood next to the display screen, reviewing the data logs. "The cohort has completed all field objectives. I will finalize our report for the academy tonight." No one cheered, but several students exhaled in visible relief. Evan leaned back in his chair. No broken limbs, no venom extractions, no catastrophic dehydration. I'd call that a win. And a new species under observation, Rennick added, stroking the hatchling's back. We will submit it for classification pending genetic analysis, Fressel said. The Academy will be pleased. Evan raised his cup. To surviving the desert. The cohort mimicked the gesture, some with cups, others with the awkward stiffness of beings unfamiliar with toasts. Later, after the lights dimmed and most of the students had retreated to their bunks, Evan sat alone near the observation window. The stars outside were sharp and unblinking. Gilly rested beside him, her breathing slow and even. Fressel approached and stood silently for a moment. You intend to remain here, he said eventually. Not much waiting for me elsewhere. You could command a larger team. Probably. But then who'd stop her from gnawing on the power conduits? That is not a compelling argument. Evan smiled faintly. It is to me. Fressel nodded once. Your methods are unorthodox, but the results speak for themselves. Evan looked out at the desert. It's not about methods. It's about sticking around long enough to matter. Fressel considered that. I will include that in my report, he said. Evan shook his head. Don't. They'll think it's a metaphor. Fressel turned and walked away without another word. Evan leaned back, stretched his legs, and scratched behind Gilly's jaw. She flicked her tongue once, content. The desert would heat up again tomorrow. The wind would rise. Something would break, someone would panic, and a lizard would probably steal someone's lunch. He'd be ready.